So hello, everybody, and welcome and happy International Self-Care Day. Isn't it marvelous that there is now a whole day, one day a year, that's just for self-care? I think it really goes to show how far we've come away from the kind of the medical profession is in charge of my health to I'm actually in charge of my health. Self-care is my sort of domain, and like David talks about often, which is being a sovereign in your own life, being that kind of the driver in the driving seat of your own life. You're not the passenger. Or like one guy I was working with who realized he was like in the boot of the car. He was so not in control of his life. So that kind of being the sovereign in your life and having that agency. And I think the fact that there's now an International Self-Care Foundation, there's an International Self-Care Day, which is today, is a testament to the fact that we're all much more aware that we need to know our self-care. But not just that, we need to do it. Hence, we've got the discussion here today because we're talking about why to do it and how to do it. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Thor A. Rain. I'm a pain and fatigue specialist. I'm also a social entrepreneur. So I run a clinic with a social mission, which is all about learning how to read and respond to our emotions and sensations, so our feelings. Because when we're able to read and respond to emotions or like pain, fatigue, stress, or anxiety, we're much more able to take helpful and constructive action to help either ease and resolve, or at least manage and sort of minimize the impact of such experiences. Hence, I've written a book with Nikki here, who's with us today. Nikki, if you could just say hi as well. Nikki is my co-author for the First Date for Feelings manual. I then want to introduce the panel. So I'm going to start with David because I can see him in the top left-hand corner of my camera. So David, if you could just give us a bit of an introduction about you and why you're participating in the panel with us today.
Thanks, Thor. Welcome, everybody. Lovely to see some new faces and new names, as well as some very familiar faces and some familiar names. So yeah, I'm David Brown. I'm a life coach, and I sort of very much specialize in embodiment. So connecting people not just to their minds, but also connecting them to their bodies so that they have, like you might have heard of, like the three brains, you know, the mind, the heart, and the gut. So I really help people connect to that and be able to connect to lots of different levels of wisdom in their full selves. And for me, self-care is about nourishing yourself and nurturing yourself. So the whole idea of being very sort of aware of the whole of yourself becomes very important in this notion of self-care, so that you can really listen to what it is that your body is telling you, so that you can respond in the moment to whatever it is that you need. So when I'm coaching with my clients, I encourage them to make that deep connection and then to make some really empowered choices around what they choose to do in their lives. And then, as well as doing the coaching, I'm also the founder of the Institute of Sovereign Leadership, which, as Thor said, is very much about, again, connecting to the body and making these sovereign choices about what you do in your life and how you do it in your life and the choices that you make.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. I know we'll be hearing more about that as we go through the discussion today. So Svava, if I could go to you and ask you to sort of introduce yourself. And I know you've got some friends here as well, but for those of us who don't know what you do, if you give us a little bit of an insight into that and why you're participating in the discussion.
Thank you, Thor. Thank you for having me. And it's so great to be here with you. And just like David said, it's great to see new faces and some familiar faces and familiar names. Very good to be here with you. I am in Iceland right now, but a lot of my work and people that are here with us today that know me from the US, where I lived for many, many years. But my journey basically started on my own healing journey as a survivor of childhood neglect and abuse. And way into my healing, also became an advocate for breaking the silence, recognized pretty early on that if I'd been given the language to ask for what I needed as a child or how to get help, I would have done something about it sooner. And so founded a nonprofit here in Iceland. Seems like a long time ago, but that was the start of just my public speaking and being very putting a face to a very, challenging, trauma that a lot of people struggle with. And we are often compelled to not speak about it for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But as a result of that, and continuing my own healing journey, more and more survivors were coming to me and asking, what are you doing? How have you found your way to heal and restore? And through that process and my own healing, today I work as a tension and trauma release provider, which is, working deeply with the body and often the chronic tension patterns that we learn as a survival mechanism, even from childhood. And so really helping people to understand your body is your best friend. Your body is always working for you. It's always trying to connect with you. So when you asked me to be a part of this, I think I talk about self-care 24/7 in my work. And that also allows me to hold myself accountable to, my body is how I do my work. It's not from my head, it's from my heart, like I say. And that lives in my body. So holding space and being a part of a community dialogue about how important that is was, I felt honored to be a part of. And I love to share simple ways because no one has extra hour or two in the day, because it is a 24/7 taking care of our bodies, living in this world we live in right now. So giving people simple, simple tools that they can, add into their already busy lives and help people to see they're already doing way more than they realize around self-care. It's just a little bit of reframing. So thank you for
Brilliant.
having me.
Thank you. And I love that. Sometimes the most simple things are so powerful. So we'll be talking about that more a bit later on. So Sorrel, if I could come over to you, please, and ask the same question of you.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to be here and to be with some people I don't know and some people I do know and very much love. So yeah, I'm a trauma-informed relationship coach, but I wasn't always. I used to be an osteopath, and about 17 years ago, I started working with people with chronic fatigue syndrome, same as you saw. And what I quickly realized was that they just didn't understand self-care at all, and they would say, "I hate resting. I feel lazy." And I thought, but you haven't a choice. Your body is forcing you to just take a break. So I guess my interest in self-care kind of came with me through the transformations that I've gone through. When I became a coach, I eventually trained with something called One of Many, which is a women's coaching outfit. And they really put a huge emphasis on self-care. And it's not just about recovery for people with illnesses, whether it be physical or mental, but it's about actually just everyday life,
Yes.
isn't it? So I guess I've said everything I was going to say, and I've said it at twice the speed I planned. But all I have to say is that
Marvelous. So
self-care
I
is
think
like
the point you're making, Sorrel, is, and I think, although David didn't speak to it directly, but what's really clear, and I'd be interested to hear what Nathan has to say, is that we have all realized how important self-care is through our own experiences. It's very interesting. I know I didn't speak to that specifically, but the first aid for feelings, which is the technique, I've written the manual literally, was because I needed it. And I was like, there's nothing like that available. This was like 20 years ago. So it's, I think it's really interesting that we've learned kind of after the whatever it is that we needed to include it. And I know for you as well, Sorrel, we talked about kind of going into preventative, getting people to learn self-care before they get ill or before things go bad in relationships or whatever. So Nathan, if we come to you, I'd be interested to hear your take on that and kind of how you answer that question.
Could you just give me the question again, Thor? Sorry.
Yeah,
I was listening. I was just sort of taking it all in.
Yeah, sure. So the question is a little introduction to you and kind of what you do and why you are participating in the panel discussion.
Yeah, so my name's Nathan Whitbread. I run an organisation called the Neurodivergent Coach, which is all about coaching with the primary focus on individuals who have either got neurodivergent traits or manage people with neurodivergent traits or work with people with neurodivergent traits or in organisations with people with neurodivergent traits. So actually it covers an awful lot of people. The reason why I do that is because I actually fundamentally believe that the human being underneath is far more important than any of the traits that we present with. And I'm on a bit of a mission to kind of change the narrative around this space and move it to a human-centric approach as opposed to some sort of specialist labeling system. So that's kind of why I mean why who I am. In terms of the self-care piece, it's just a piece of dialogue that comes up all the time, because one of the things, well, lots of things come up around neurodiversity, but one of the things that comes up quite a lot is this idea of masking, or this idea of being something you're not, or learnt behaviors that allow you to exist. And one thing I've learnt about masks is they're often incredibly heavy and you have to take them off at some point. And you generally take it off with the people you care about most. And I'm sure that's true for lots of other things, by the way. I'm just talking about my world, but I know this stuff isn't unique to this space. It's that's part of my learning. Yeah, you're having a conversation about neurodiversity, you're having a conversation about inclusion, suddenly you're having a conversation about human beings. Wow, here we go. And the other thing that I've really noticed about this space is that boundaries are really important. But one of the things that really struck me about that, probably through my own experience, is that boundaries undefended will fall.
Ooh, I love that phrase. How powerful. Yes.
Yeah, those castles of old. Yeah, if they don't defend the walls fall. And that is really true in this space, around self-care. Do you want to say any more? Is that enough? So I'm just quite conscious.
No, that's perfect. That's spot on. And for those of you who know me, you'll be tickled by this. But those of you who don't know me, I'm a big medieval history geek. So that metaphor, Nathan, is like, I get that. And I live in a city with a castle and I walk my dogs by the castle. I'm like, yes. And so and I've not heard it phrased like that before. And I think that's one of the beauties of coming together, because I know you all in different types of conversations, but I've not heard you say that phrase before, Nathan. And I think it's such a good one, and I'm sure the others will agree. So those are the kind of introductions. So you got a bit more of a sense of us. Before we finish, we'll also talk a little bit about what we're doing next and how you can stay in touch with us. So just sit back if you're able to, or get whatever position is most comfortable for you as we go into the conversation. I often invite people to just take a moment to check, have you got what you need to hand, like cushions, water, pen and paper, other devices on do not disturb, just kind of, okay, now you've got a bit of a sense of us. Can you settle in for the next hour or so, an hour and 15 minutes, as we are here together to just check in with self-care and have a chat about self-care? And before we go into the talking part, I want to invite you to maybe just check in if you're able to, sort of maybe your eyebrows. We often keep a lot of tension in our forehead, checking in with your jaw. That's another place. So depending on your own pain information, just going with whatever you can do, is just giving the jaw maybe a bit of comfort, a bit of movement, coming down your neck, shoulders, maybe just rolling your shoulders a bit. Always being listening to the body, checking in with notions or information, sensations. But I talk about kind of rolling shoulders. And then the pelvic girdle, that kind of sitting bones and all the big and small bones and ligaments and tendons and muscles, all of that kind of in that sitting aspect of your body. So shuffling your sitting bones a bit can be helpful. And again, listening to any messages to say, no, please don't move, and being respectful of that. And then if you can bring your awareness down through your knees, down to the soles of your feet. Feet are on the floor, they're tucked underneath you. And then just giving your toes a little bit of a twiggle. Yeah. I always say, it can be helpful to remind our brain of the other end of our bodies. The brain can think it's just walking around in space. But actually there's a whole body. And when we twiggle our toes, the signal is having to travel along the longest nerves in the body and come right back up again. And it's a little bit like doing refresh on your browser. It can be quite helpful just to connect different aspects of our central nervous system in that very gentle way. Right. You might want to take a breath or two and just noticing what it feels like to breathe. Is it easy? Is it challenging? Is it difficult? And noticing that whether we may mean to or not, our lungs breathe. But actually, when we're able to be mindful of the breath can be a lot easier. Even if it's still maybe challenging if we're dealing with respiratory issues, when we're able to bring a gentle mind, compassionate mind and heart to our breathing, it's just a bit softer. So as much as you need to during the time together that we have today, just checking in with those little nudges that you're getting from your body and caring for them as much as you're able to. So let's move into permissions, the first topic, the first question. So I want to start with Sorrel, actually. So if we start with permissions, because you work sort of in the space of relationships. And I think often in the space of relationships, we're not just having to deal with our own kind of inner critic, our own beliefs and behaviors. We're actually having to deal with like other people's. And I think primarily you work with kind of intimate relationships, so partners, spouses, lovers, but you know, obviously that will also apply to parents and children and siblings. But if we come to those of us who have romantic partners and spouses and other relationship factors that you want to bring in, what is it that you notice in terms of permissions that people either struggle to give themselves or need to get from others, or how that works, Sorrel?
I'd say it's a huge block for a lot of people. And when I'm working one-to-one, actually it doesn't matter if it's one-to-one or a couple.
Okay,
First thing I want them to do is start on their self-care. And
right.
it might take them 6 months to get to that place, but it's partly because when you're working to transform a relationship which is in trouble, it's very challenging because you've got to actually examine what your contribution is to that problem. And
Mm,
that becoming aware of the things you're doing, which is sabotaging your relationship, is hard and it's painful. And it often relates back to things that happened in childhood. So if you're not doing your self-care, it's going to be much harder. So yeah, it's kind of a foundational piece, really.
yeah. And I think we've talked about as well that, you know, one partner can be more aware of how important self-care is. And, you know, might want to invest money, like getting help.
Oh yes.
And the other partner's like, no, 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 I don't believe in any of that stuff.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a
so
real
that kind of
common problem.
negotiating like money or negotiate, you know, for self-care or time for self-care or even just space for self-care can be challenging within a relationship.
And I find myself coaching people. And sometimes it's like, okay, so what are you doing over here that you can bring into here?
Right. So if
Because
it's
it's like,
okay to spend money over here, what, you know, what does that give you in terms of permission to spend money over here
or
for
even maybe just
self-care
time.
or time? Yeah,
And
money, time, or
paying,
space.
yeah, and paying attention to myself as opposed to always looking at what's going on outside. So it's that
Right.
um and people say, oh well, sometimes I journal at night time. So I'll say, okay, well, journal every night then.
Mm,
So I start with where they are.
yeah.
Like for me, it's always baby steps.
Yes.
Because I know personally that for me, if I didn't do it in baby steps, I never would have got there. And I roll back all the time and have to bring myself forward again.
Yeah.
Always
I
baby
think it's such a good point, that kind of starting with ourselves and maybe not looking for that permission from our partners, but actually giving myself permission to
steps.
do like journaling or
I'd
those
never
kind of
get them to get permission from their partner. That's not a good idea. It's like,
Exactly. Well, I
you
think
should
that's
have
sometimes
permission.
what the misconceptions that people have,
Oh,
that
yeah.
I can't do my self-care in this marriage unless my partner is okay with it.
Yeah, and that's something I would have to address with them.
Yeah. So I think that's maybe something for those of you who have that in your relationships. You know, are you waiting for your partners to give yourself permission? Or even if they don't understand your need for, or how you need to do self-care, that actually if you understand and you know the truth of it, to really give yourself permission to follow through with it. So Nathan, if I come over to you in terms of permissions, what is it that you find sort of comes up in your consultation or your works that people struggle with in terms of giving themselves permission to do self-care?
Well, so one of the things that comes up a lot in the neurodiversity space is this kind of concept of RSD, or rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
Yes.
And one of the best ways to explain that is that I care more about what you think than I think, more about what you need than I need. And that impacts all sorts of things in relationships. I mean, I predominantly work in the workspace, I'd add, but it also impacts, you know, personal relationships and stuff like that. So that idea that actually I'm less important, or my needs are less important, obviously impacts self-care, because it means that the very things that we need to make life work are then ignored. And one of the ways I find really useful to think about it is like taking from the title of your book, Thor, you know, you wrote with Nicky, was first aid things. Actually, for first aid to happen,
Yeah.
there's one essential thing that needs to happen before you can do any sort of first aid on anybody. And of course, if you ask people this question, what do you think it is?
Yeah.
What is it?
The awareness, exactly.
Well, no, it's not that. It's not even that thought. Before you can do first aid on anyone else, you need to be safe.
Yes, that bit. Yes, absolutely.
You never enter a room if you don't know if it's safe. You'd never go up to somebody who's had electric cables lying across them and start performing CPR because it's not safe. And it's like, well, it's not safe to kind of do life in many ways if you're not looking after yourself.
Yeah.
You're running huge risks. I mean, it may not be like the time bomb sort of risk, but it's a risk over time. And it's just like, and it's not, and I think there's also some dialogue that it's about self-indulgence, it's about self-esteem and self-pity or an easy way out. And I don't think that's true. Actually, self-care is often quite hard work in some ways in terms of putting the time aside to do it.
Yeah.
And secondly, actually continuing with the things that kind of serve you well. That's what I think. And that certainly turns up in my space quite a bit.
I think that's such a good point there, Nathan. I think, and I'll be certainly speaking to self-pity in a bit, and Self-Pity City, which I visit regularly when I need to, and give myself full permission to hang out there for a bit, but not take a permanent residency. Yeah, we don't move in, we just go and visit. Like one of my very good friends a while back when I was having a hard time, she just sent me a text message saying, I'll validate your ticket for Self-Pity City for the day. And I was like, that's perfect. That was the parking ticket. So yeah, but I think also, Nathan, your observation, which I know, but I hadn't thought of, which is that before entering anybody else's situation, am I okay? And I know that in terms of first aid in the workplace training, or even just kind of search and rescue and those kind of things that you always need to make sure, is it safe to enter a situation? Am I safe to enter a situation? I thank you so much for bringing that in as well. So David, if I come across to you and, what are you hearing in terms of the kind of permissions that people struggle with?
I think the first one is harsh self-judgment.
Yes.
So that really critical voice that says you're not enough, or you're not worthy, or other people are more important, or what other people think are more important, and so it goes on and on and on. And that was definitely one of my specialized subjects. And so, like, my journey of self-care has definitely been around taking the time to really look at that, and to look at the beliefs that have sat underneath that, so that I can begin to challenge some of those beliefs and replace them with beliefs that feel much more empowering, so that I feel like, yeah, okay, I can take some time out, and I can ask for what I want, and I can ask somebody to maybe not do something because it's challenging for me, or or whatever it might be. So that's one really, really big thing for me. And then the other one that comes up a lot is external validation. So people looking outside of themselves for permission.
Yes.
Which, if they're around people that really love them, then that's kind of okay. It's like a good band-aid to go over it. But if we can find a way of learning how to validate ourselves and give ourselves permission to do these things, then that comes from a much more solid, stable place. And so to talk about it in the terms of the body, that kind of external validation, like, it often shows up as a kind of a leaning forward and a grasping. And if the validation comes back in a positive way, then it's this kind of like, oh. Whereas if it comes back in a negative response, there's this kind of collapse that happens in the body, which then often results in, like, we get back into that self-judgment place. Whereas to feel really solid and stable in the body, where you're not feeling pulled forward or you're not feeling pushed back, and you're feeling neither collapse nor this sense of trying to kind of compensate by making yourself bigger than you really are. There's this sense of being able to just sit and feel in that confident, powerful place of, yes, I feel able to give myself this, be it time or energy or whatever it might be.
I think that's such a good point about sometimes sometimes the way I know that I need self-care is because my body lets me know. And I noticed, for example, my chin going forward, you know, or my chin going up a little bit. It's like I'm keeping my head above water. So I think they're kind of noticing how we can kind of collapse or almost like go like this. You know, these are very, I mean, it's like indicators in a car. You know, with the dashboard indicators, when I know what to look for in terms of how my own body shows me what's going on.
Yes.
It's such a powerful clue. So thanks for bringing it to the body. And then I want to move on to Svava, which of course with the TRE is very much about body stuff. So in terms of you, Svava, what are you seeing about permissions that we seek or maybe don't get or don't give ourselves?
Well, I think it's interesting, you know, a lot of my clients are coming from abuse, trauma, history, but as I'm more and more working with, I don't know what's regular, what's a normal human. I'm seeing all of us have struggle with giving ourselves permission to take the time for ourselves, to really care. And I think a lot of it is no one along the way stopped to ask us what we needed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that may have started in childhood. And I think for a lot of survivors of abuse and trauma, you know, our coping strategy was to focus externally on taking care of other people. We learned to play small, to shrink ourselves, to not need anything, to be so hyper vigilant we can read other people's thoughts and feelings and see around corners almost, right? So we became very good at knowing what was coming before other people knew what were coming. I mean, this can become our superpower today as we heal from it. But I can share from my own experience, once, you know, the self-care came more and more into my life as I started my healing, I was resentful because I was like, you know, when is someone coming to rescue me? When is someone going to come do this for me? So, and I was looking over my shoulder in terms of like, whose permission, like, were they looking for me for the permission? But I didn't know how to turn towards me. No one had shown me what that looks like, what that feels like when someone leans in and says, Svava, what do you think? What do you need?
Yeah.
Right. So that was an interesting experience. But as I became more and more aware of, like what Nathan said so beautifully, the need for safety.
Yes.
I mean, our body, whether we're aware of it or not, is always scanning our environment. You know, am I safe? And do I have energy? And these things happen underneath our eyeballs, whether, and like you said, you're starting to, the cues that your body's giving you, am I safe in this space, in this context, and in this conversation, and with these humans, learning to kind of slowly read the body and giving ourselves permission to be aware of them, you know, and to give ourselves permission to ask for what we need. And I learned that, like Sorrel said, in relationships, you know, with my ex-husband, I used to resent him because he would come home from work, grab his running gear and leave. And I'd be like, you know, what about me? And then I was like, wait a minute, he's doing something I won't. So I was like, okay, when he came from work, I handed him the kids. I'm going to go for a walk. Not in a resentful way, but basically just like to model, like he didn't quite understand. I'm like, well, you're doing it. I needed to. And then we were able to negotiate the permission and what we needed. So permission is a multi-layered, I think. But yeah, but it's interesting because the person that I really needed permission from was me, that I didn't really know what I needed to start with. And then slowly, as I became more and more aware of, you know, understanding with compassion why I was operating in the world the way I was able to expand, that I was allowed to take more space. I was allowed to ask for permission and give myself permission to take that time and energy to invest in my care.
Thank you, Svava, for sharing so personally. And I can really relate to what you're saying. You know, I think it took me a long time to figure out even what a permission was, you know, and this is, I think, why I, kind of wrote the manual, because, you know, I remember in my early healing work, reading books, and they were like, love yourself. And I was like, that's a great idea. How do I do that? Or,
Exactly.
you know, give yourself, I'm like, excellent. I'm such a practical person, and I'm such like, I need like, okay, so how do I do it? But then it came to, well, okay, so I could like, okay, like maybe somebody here today with us will see, oh, I can relate to that, or that might be something that I can work out. And I often think of it in terms of clothes. So it might be the right garment, but it's not the right size, or it's not the right color, or it's not quite right around the shoulders. So I can get inspiration. We can talk about that next, about, you know, what kind of permission I need, but I need to customize it to my own self. And that kind of, and David was talking about the inner critic, you know, I remember when I realized that the inner critic wasn't so much kind of trying to get me, it was actually trying to help me stay safe. So realizing that my inner critic is like a risk manager, is like completely overzealous in his job description, and and we need to kind of update the programming by like 20 software updates and really recalibrate that conversation. So now my inner critic is part of the conversation, and I need my inner critic for risk management, and I absolutely, you know, in a proportionate kind of healthy way. And part of that was renegotiate, first of all, becoming aware of what is the current belief. And one of my beliefs was that I need to earn my place. And it's like, hang on a minute, if I need to earn my place and then I just go off gallivanting doing whatever self-care means, then surely it's a conflict. So I think, first of all, writing down kind of what are some of the blocks. And often what I hear is, I feel guilty. You know, whether that's I feel guilty because my partner, child, parent, colleague, whatever, or just guilty because there are people in war zones suffering, or, you know, this is a privileged problem that I have. You know, people have got so much worse than I. So some of those things I find so corrosive because they can sound like morally right, but there's like a logical flaw in it. You know, so, you know, I always remember my Buddhist teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, talking about the doctor who is out there in the field every day helping people heal, doing surgery, providing medicine. If that doctor doesn't get a good night's sleep, doesn't get the right medicine, get nutrition, doesn't get love, you know, if they need sex, doesn't get sex, if they, you know, need, gym or activities or sort of something else to occupy there and nourish them, they won't be able to go into the field the next day and help other people in their medicine or medical capacity. And I think for me, when I really learned that kind of, because I'd heard oxygen mask on yourself first, you know, a gazillion times, I fly a lot. But I remember literally being on a plane and they were going through their blah, 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 you know, for the gazillionth time. And I heard it. I didn't just listen, I just actually really heard it. And I thought through, well, if I don't do that, what will then happen? I made my mind think through the consequences, particularly with a young child. And anybody who's been a parent of a young child will know it's completely counterintuitive to not put the oxygen mask on the child first. But I thought, well, if in that fraction of a second I pass out, the child isn't going to be okay anyway. And I remember, you know, I had to take my mind kind of by the hand and think through each and every step of that. So I thought that was, some of those things can be interesting to just to play with and explore in your own reality. And then just come back to self-pity city. Yeah, like you, Svava, you know, I came into adulthood with a few ACEs, some adverse childhood experiences in my pocket, quite a bit of trauma. And sometimes it was really helpful for me to go into woe is me, poor me. This is really hard. Well, you know, because my favorite question is always, is it helpful? Hence I run the helpful clinic. So sometimes it's helpful to hang out there for a few hours, maybe even a day. If it goes beyond the day, potentially unhelpful. Then you're kind of moved in. You're putting down the roots. It's helpful to disengage again and go back into the power space of being in the driving seat. But sometimes giving ourselves permission or asking a good friend, like my friend who sent me the text message about validating my parking in Self-Pity City. Sometimes we just need to go, this is really hard, and I need to go into my 5-year-old self and just go, I wish somebody would just come and rescue me and make it all go away. Just not get stuck there. So that's kind of the permission part of our discussion today. So with that in mind, like my self-pity city, you know, so one of those kind of ideas and inspiration. So I then want to move into the second conversation about that. What kind of ideas are working for you? What ideas have you heard working for the people you support? So we can give some ideas here for people. They can then maybe jot down and get a sense of, oh, could I use that for me? Or, oh, that's a great idea, but I'll customize it so it fits better. So if I come to you, Nathan, and check in, what are some of the ideas or inspirations that either you've used in your own life or you've heard from the people you support?
I think in terms of the stuff to do self-care, I think that is often an exploratory conversation, because I think when you get into tricky places, you forget the things that bring you joy.
Yes.
And personally, I've been really impacted by this because a friend of mine died earlier this year, and the last thing he wrote in his journal before he died was maximize joy. And I was really impacted by that, because knowing him, who he is, he's not talking about maximize joy in the sense of selfish joy, but he always wanted to see joy in others. But I think sometimes it's really hard to know what that is. So actually having a safe conversation to work that out is really helpful. So without dodging the question completely, the thought of things that bring
No,
me
but I think
joy.
what you're saying is that we sometimes need somebody else's help. We sometimes need a
Yeah,
conversation to actually,
definitely.
particularly if we're not sure, or this is
Yeah,
new
yeah.
to us, that in
Yeah.
conversation with somebody trusted, whether it's a professional or not, they can help us get
Yeah.
to that, what's personal to us. I think that's a really good point there, Nathan.
Yeah, and I think what's important is not always the activity, but
Yeah.
more how it makes us feel and the type of thing it is. So for example, for me, I really like, exercise. I really enjoy hanging out with other people. I really like games and things that push me. I really like new things. So there's lots of stuff that fits into that. But in my space, sometimes you get obsessions and sometimes you get new and shiny stuff. So what can happen, which I'm always really conscious of, is that sometimes the solution can become part of the problem. And what I mean by that is the very thing, because good things are put in place for good reasons, but then we forget the reasons, and then the thing becomes like, something unhelpful. So being aware of that is really, really important. So what I was going to add was, I think it's really helpful to have a menu of stuff that's useful, because when we're on the top of our game, feeling energized, we might want to do one thing, and that might bring us really good results around self-care. But sometimes we might just need a bit of micro self-care. And what I mean by that is something that kind of ticks us over on a day-to-day basis, which might look very different. So for me, it was skipping. Actually, lockdown was all about skipping. I learned to skip, and then I got better at it. But the thing is, you can skip in 5 minutes, or you can spend several hours doing it. But it's something, and you can carry a rope anywhere, and it costs you like 12 quid.
Yeah,
It's
I love
so,
that. Yeah, exactly. And like in the first aid for feelings manual, we talk about having a first aid kit, which sounds like your menu. And what I talk
yeah,
about there, sometimes there's a sell by date or use by date on some of these things. And
yeah.
there are some things in my first aid kit for feelings that have been there since I created it over 20 years ago. And then there are some things that are, go past its use by date in 12 months or 3 weeks.
Yeah, exactly.
And that doesn't make them wrong. It's just there was that kind of medicine.
It's holding it lightly, isn't it?
Yes,
That's the beauty of
exactly.
it. So yeah, so that's what I mean. That's kind of what I see turn up. Yeah, and I think it's different for everyone. But I think encouraging people to experiment and treat it like a project, have fun with it, see what works, what doesn't, and be brave enough to try and brave enough to put things down and move on, and maybe come back to them at some point, or maybe not. I mean, I think that's all good stuff.
Yeah, and I think that kind of doing the experiments, I know we connect on this, we're
Yeah,
always
yeah,
like, let's check things out, see how it feels. If it doesn't feel nice, then I'll stop doing it, but actually to
yeah.
do the experiment. And also for those of you who work with me or know me, my most profound spiritual enlightenment moment came listening to the radio in the car, and the song that was playing was Bananarama. It's not what you do, it's the way that you do it, and that's what gets results. And that's kind of what you're talking about then, Nathan. It's like, sometimes it
Absolutely.
isn't about the activity itself. I mean, sometimes it is, but sometimes about the
Yeah.
state that you're in when you're doing it.
Yeah, and who you do it with sometimes.
And who you do it with. Absolutely. Right. So then talking about who you do it with, we go over to Sorrel. So if we talk about, who you do it with, we may or may not be your partner. It might also be a friend or a colleague or family member. But for you, kind of ideas or inspirations, either personal or from the people that you work with.
I was going to say this, like, it's a massive range from like just listening to the messages of your body. So for instance, I don't always, but I often have a headache on Friday morning because it's the end of the week. I stop work on Thursday night. I've probably crammed way too much into Thursday. And that's one of my messages that says, slow down, don't run around all day Friday, just take it easy. But the other thing I was going to say, which is kind of a story from when my marriage was in its death throes, and my sister introduced me to Morris dancing when I visited her in Chorley in Lancashire. And I thought, God, this is so much more fun than the gym. And I'd been going to the gym as self-care, but I really didn't like it very much. The machines kept breaking down, and it was full of old people who didn't do much work anyway and wanted to chat about other stuff, which is fine. So I took up Morris dancing. And it wasn't just the exercise, it was the community, it was the amount of fun we had, it was learning new skills, because actually it's really hard.
Yes, there's a lot of skill
Your
involved.
hands
Yeah.
and your feet and your sticks and your hankies. And it served me really well. And I left my ex and got divorced, and I carried on Morris dancing until lockdown. And then we were practicing in the cemetery until it got to the point in the year when it was too dark at 7 o'clock. And then we stopped, and I never went back. Partly because I met somebody, we were having a lovely time together, and I didn't need the Morris dancing anymore.
Yeah.
So
I love that. That is, it was off its time. The fact that you didn't need it anymore didn't make it good or bad. It just made it off its time.
It did. And it would still be fantastic
Yes.
if I really wanted to spend that much time hanging out with people dressed in black.
Well, for those of you who are not UK based, so I know there's quite a few people here from the States, and also I know from South America, there's people here from different parts of the world. Morris dancing is like a UK form of folk dancing where, yes, they're dressed in black and they have hankies and they have sticks. And if you want to find out more, check YouTube, because it's hilarious and it's fun and it's playful.
And you can find the side I like to dance with on YouTube. We were called Hemlock. They're still called Hemlock. But anyway, that's very specific. Yeah, hemlock is a poison, as you probably know.
Exactly, I do know that's a poison. But I also know that when you use sparingly, it can be medicinal.
Yes.
It could also be an interesting self-care message that sometimes things that when they're used to excess or used to in doses that are too big can be fatal. But when you use just sparingly and just right, it's like, because I do clinical hypnosis, I don't use it often, but when I use it with patients that I support or people I support, I use it, it's like a scalpel. It's a very specific tool for a very specific purpose. So hemlock may be needed, or the metaphorical hemlock in somebody's first aid kit. Brilliant. So thanks for that, Sorrel. I want to go over to David. So in terms of ideas and inspiration, either from yourself or the people that you've supported.
So although I focus very much on the body and the work that I do with people, it hasn't always been so. And I spent a lot of my life very disconnected from my body, even though I did a lot of physical, like a lot of sport. I was a swimmer and a cyclist and a martial artist, and I'm a walker and all kinds of wonderful things. But I really used to abuse my body. Really, really used to abuse my body. And once I started to make this connection between the mind and the body, it made me completely rethink my relationship with myself, and therefore what I do as a way of enjoyment, what I do to maintain and sustain myself, what I do for thriving. So whilst I love to still do a lot of the things that I just spoke about, I tend to do them very differently. Again, it's not so much what I do, but the way that I do it. And one of the wonderful practices that I've taken on is a thing called the Feldenkrais method, which is about movement with awareness. So it really brings alive for me, my body in movement. And I became much, much more aware of the whole of myself, which sounds a little bit weird, but through emotional trauma in my childhood, I had completely like disconnected from the left side of my body, lost a lot of movement and strength in the left side of my body, and being introduced to the Feldenkrais method reconnected me with that. And so from the perspective of self-care, it was just this most incredible revelation, because suddenly I was aware of all of this stuff that had been undealt with, untended, uncared for. And so since then I've been on this ongoing journey of really reconnecting with that, So when I work with clients, it's rarely quite as extreme as that, but getting them to become much more aware of themselves just opens this portal into so much more wisdom and insight and understanding about themselves in whole new ways that can give them guidance, but it can also show them or indicate to them what it is that they need to be working with. So as I draw to a close, I'm not sure I've answered your question, but that's what I've got.
Well, thank you for that, David. And it reminds me of another reason why I kind of created the first aid for feelings, and in particular first aid kit, the actual. So I don't know if you can see here on the shelf, there's like a leather briefcase here, which is the demo kit for the first aid for feelings workshop. And in that briefcase, there are things, there's stuff. There are index cards with ideas, there are fidget toys, there's, smells and things. Because when we actually start to get in touch with our bodies, and I'm sure, Svava, you can speak to this in a minute, we start feeling feelings. So hang on, yo, this is all a bit much. So having a way to pace. So for those of you who have done recovery, you may know pacing from a physical perspective, and that is important, but also the mental and emotional pacing. So in the first little feelings manual, we'll talk about containing and completing. That is not always appropriate to complete all the feelings we're feeling. We just may not be simply able to, for all sorts of reasons. And also that we may need to just, particularly in terms of trauma, we need to work with it kind of in stages and give us a bit of respite in between. So knowing, so for example, I use visual content. So I use maybe YouTube videos, episodes and movies. So YouTube video might be a 15 minutes, an episode might be like half an hour, 45 minutes, and a movie is 2 hours. So it depends on what strength of paracetamol I want, what kind of visual content I use to help me get a bit of respite from my feelings. And I think the key there between respite and denial, so when you're blocking your feelings, like, I'm not going to feel anything, I'm just going to do lots of working, do lots of drinking, do lots of going to the gym, do lots of sex, do lots of rescuing other people, I'm just not going to feel anything. That's definitely denial or blocking. Whereas if I go, I'm going to take a break, it's a conscious choice, makes it a totally different experience. Because when we start to get back in touch with stuff, some of it is a bit, and that was, of course, the whole reason why we disconnected in the first place. So that leads me on to you, Svava, of course, coming at it from a place of trauma. So I'd be curious to hear your ideas and inspirations, both from yourself or people you support.
Thank you, Thor. You set this up perfectly, because when people come and they're curious about TRE, because, we're a lot of us learning that we need to include the body when it comes to healing, and the body keeps the score, right? We're just a history book of our life. And very much, it can take a few sessions before we actually start to do the actual work, because I'm always meeting the person where they're at and how comfortable they are with their bodies. And just like we talked about, way for so many of us, and just living in our fast-paced world, a way to find some peace and calm is by checking out. It's just simply to leave the scene, leave the body, or go into daydreaming, what have you. But as I work with people and we start to kind of talk about how comfortable they are with, like David talks about, being embodied, can you hold what's here in your body comfortably? And for people that have done quite a bit of work on themselves, they say, yeah, I know my feelings, I have some tools. But the first step is always, like for me, it was, I need to work with this body, but how do I turn towards this body? How do I meet myself? Like, how do I even, like, no one looked to Svava with warmth and care. So I didn't know how to care for me, because there was no inner experience of that. And that to me is key when we're working with our bodies. It's to be present and to befriend our bodies and our experiences, and doing it so safely. And I think as a practitioner, it's my job to go as slow as we need to support the person in feeling safe and contained and able to self-regulate the process. Because like you said, when we start working towards the body, we are going to experience what lives here. And it's not bad. And that's the other thing too. We've already been through the worst.
Yes.
It's just to, with the awareness, befriend it, turn towards it, name it, being able to contain it in a way. And like you said, we can also choose to put it away if we want, for a time being, or pendulate, turn towards it and then step away from it. But just to kind of simplify what I do is that I guide people through very simple mindfulness exercises. They're not for everyone. I realize that, but very early in it, I invite people to turn towards their bodies if they were meeting their very, very best, safest friend.
Oh, yes.
And then I invite them to like tell their bodies first, sit with the experience when you meet your very best friend there, where you can be there and just you don't have to put on a face. You can just be your full self with your emotions and challenges. Like that person, what does that feel like? And just to be aware of that. And then you say to your body, I'm here because I want to learn with you. I want to connect with you. I'm curious. And I really want to listen because I know that you, just like me, are doing the very best you can. And just then recognize how that lands in your body. And for a lot of people, it's like, wow. I mean, I've done this now thousands of times. And there's still to this day where I will find tears in my eyes and I can feel the softness in my body where it's like, oh, thank you for being so kind to me. And I do this over and over and over again. And it's like I needed to practice what that softness felt like. And in the beginning, it was a little prickly. It was a little uncomfortable because I was very good at this, being hard on this body. And then we place our hand on our chest. I mean, we have our inner pharmacy, just like we can, under stress, we activate our cortisol and adrenaline. We can also activate our happy hormones, our feel-good hormones. Lots of research about self-compassion. And so it's the number one tool that I teach people, the simple act of placing your hand on your heart and just do your best. Feel that touch, feel that warmth. And if appropriate, can you send a little bit of kindness towards your body? And I mean, when I first learned about this, it was uncomfortable. So I had my phone ring 3 times a day for a year, where I just did this. And sometimes it was just on the red light or while I was brushing my teeth. But I was just like, okay, research tells me, I know what this body's been through with all those ACEs, that the toxic stress. If research tells me that this can make a difference in the health and well-being of my body, and I'll tell you later about my motivation, I'm willing to do it. And it worked. So, but it's those toolkits, like you said, I give people a handful of little tools, slowing your breathing, looking slowly over your shoulders with eyes wide open. You'd be amazed the impact it has on your body and your nervous system.
And I think you come to that point of the 1%, only to do one thing. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. So
Less is more.
Exactly. So those of you who are familiar with marginal gains theory or compound interest, just the 1%. If you do 1% and then you do 1%, it's like those marginal things will actually accumulate to quite big things. So you don't need to start with much. And it is like, that, looking around, I think particularly with open eyes, or even just stretching your hands out, marking your space through your body shape, those kind of things can really make a difference. But it's that kind of bringing it in. And I often recommend an app. It's called, for those of you who are on iPhone, I think it's called Hi Future Self, as in hello, future self. And on Android, it's called Dear Future Self. And you can set yourself little reminders that pop up on your phone. Like, take a breath, or like twiddle your toes, those kind of things. So whatever your thing is, if something props up to remind you regularly, and I always say in sight, in mind, which is the opposite of out of sight, out of mind, that then helps you to remember to do the 1%, to do the little thing that matters. And I'm going to share with you one thing that's in my first aid kit. So I've got here a pebble. It's been my first aid kit for over 20 years. It's from a beach in Iceland. And those of you may be able to see there's a hole in it. Yeah. So in Icelandic, Svava, I don't know if there are any other Icelandic speaking people here, but Svava will know that dropin holar steinin. So translated, it means kind of water shapes stone, or the drip, drip, drip of the water will eventually make a hole in the stone. So something as soft and yielding as water can impact and shape, make a hole through something as firm or strong as rock. Yeah, I find that really, so we're moving on to motivation here. It's sort of really encouraging to help me remember that every drop counts. Because I was like, well, I won't do my breathing now, or I'm busy, I need to help rescue somebody else or whatever. Actually, each instance you're able to do that little bit of self-care accumulates, and it helps, and it gathers, and gradually you can break through. You will have a hole through whatever that firm discomfort is. There will be a way through with every single drop that you're able to care for. And I think for me, so coming to my motivation, I developed the first aid for feelings tool set, because there's a technique and a whole thing around it, as well as the first aid kit, the actual box, when I was ill myself. So I had fibromyalgia, I had ME/CFS. I also had complex PTSD because I arrived in adulthood with about 7 or 8 ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So there was a lot of disconnection from my body. And I think I was in my early 30s, and I was sort of reasonably academically successful, whatever that means. So reasonably intelligent. And when I realized, when I came and I felt ill, and I was like, this is all very confusing. Then I realized that when it came to my body, when it came to myself and self-care, I was practically illiterate. So being as clever and intellectual as I am, I was an absolute ignoramus when it came to the most important thing, which was keeping myself alive and well. And I think the shock of that was so sobering. And I became determined that we would, and that's the whole mission. I run a social enterprise, and the mission is to improve health and emotional literacy. Literacy, being able to read and respond, because that will then increase health and well-being. And I think my ego just took a hammering. It's like thinking that I'm like this clever person, and then realizing I'm just like so not clever at all. My ego is like, ouch. And I tell you what, that's really like, wow, okay, we're going to work on this. And first of all, to get myself back to health, and then getting the training, and then, social enterprise, and fast forward, and here we are. But I always come back to that kind of shock of blind spot. None of us can see the back of our own head. I did not know that it was not healthy to have a bag of M&Ms for dinner. Genuinely, I was in my, this is like, now I'm like, what? But, I genuinely didn't think twice about that. So that, and my pebble, because running a social enterprise, always, not quite hanging off the edge of my comfort zone, but sometimes, a bit, recognizing that every act I take, every step I take, I can, it counts towards what I'm doing, as well as obviously my banana around my theme tune is not what you do, is the way that you do it. So always coming back to me and my breath. I know that I cannot be there in consultations with people if I'm not okay. So when I'm okay and I feel connected, me and myself and I are hanging out and we're like, yes, we're good. Then I know I can be of service to others. So my altruistic self has completely understood that with altruism is absolutely pointless if self-care isn't in place. So I think for me, that's as well, because in the social enterprise environment, there's a lot of burnout. We all got the hero complex, to some degree. So, but that recognition that altruism, it can only be delivered when it's grounded in self-care, was a real big insight for me. So that's kind of my motivation, a little bit why and how. So if I go over to you, Sorrel, and kind of what's your motivation for self-care? and any kind of tips or insight you can share from people maybe that you support.
My motivation is just that, I'm 66 years old and I want to have at least another 20 years working, because I don't really want to retire. I might do by the time I'm 85, you never know. And so it's like being the best I can be, and also having just reached this point in my life where I finally feel like I've found my purpose.
Yeah.
That's huge. And actually that's a big motivation.
Yeah.
And I was kind of going to say that in the end, relationships are often the motivation. So I had back in the days when I was working as an osteopath, I had a patient who found it really hard to do any things that she knew she needed to do to get better. And I said, well, what kind of role model are you creating for your 3-year-old daughter?
Yes.
I said, oh. And then she could suddenly see that that was her motivation, was to be the best mom, and also to be a really good role model for her daughter, and to re-enter the world in all her. And she was a really, really lovely woman. I mean, she was gorgeous. And to just be able to come back into the world as sorry, I'm losing my thread here, as her best self, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's about relationships. And
absolutely. And I think that is, that kind of how do I show up in the world and what do I teach? Because anybody who's had children in their lives will know that they don't learn what you tell them.
Oh no, they learn what
they
you do.
learn what you show them.
Yes.
Yeah. So that again, it's like, if I look after myself first, I am also in that act, I am caring for you.
Yeah.
Really, thank you so much for that, Sorrel. So Nathan, if I come across to you,
Yeah,
in terms
sure.
of your motivation.
So my motivation for self-care comes back to this joy thing, actually, because, I'm a great, ultimately we have, I don't know how many seconds it is on this world, but it's not many. And why do we want to spend any of that time not in a place of doing things we enjoy?
Yeah.
And I know it's overused, but being our best selves. And actually, for me, sometimes that's about adventure as well, because I want to go. You talked about Iceland, which I've never been to, but I'd love to go. But adventure is a big part of self-care for me, because if I don't venture out into the unknown, I'll never know where my boundaries are, and I'll never know what's out there and what's possible. And I just think that that's so important. I think that's really important also for the people that I work with. I meet so many people who have a world that's so small, it's quite upsetting.
Yeah.
Not that I would ever say that to them, but it's upsetting because you just see the potential, because every human life is amazing, and it's an opportunity to live a life fulfilled. And yeah, it's just something that sits really close to my heart, and also I've not really touched it, but I have a faith, I'm a Christian, and I really believe, part of that message is all about, living a fulfilled life. And actually, and I think that starts, with self-care, because actually, if we're created to be something amazing, we should look after what we've been given and do something amazing with it. Whatever that amazing is, by the way, that amazing is different for different people. I get that. And I'm not judgmental about that at all. But I think to be amazing is often to be oneself.
Yeah, what a beautiful thing. And I know you've talked about your Christian faith, and I've been on your Best Self video podcast thing.
Oh, you have, haven't you? Yeah, of course.
It's a lot of fun. We were talking about questing and hero's journey, so we've both kind of got that kind of inner Viking spirit, or that kind of adventure spirit, and how that is also a part of, self-care and that feeling. Because what I'm hearing is that kind of, for you, motivation is to live a life fulfilled, or a life well lived. That's a big motivation.
I think so. And I think the other bit I'd just add in terms of motivation, my biggest lesson has been, it is hard to turn up for yourself.
Yeah.
But it is much easier to turn up for someone else.
Mm.
We need to make sure that person is the right person, because there is all sorts of, there's lots of things that can go a bit wonky there. Yeah. But I think if we can turn up for the right person in partnership, with the power equality, or whatever's near enough, because it's never perfect, is it? But, but it's near enough to some sort of equality. Then that makes the whole thing a lot easier, I think, personally.
Yeah. And I think that's such a true sentiment there. And I really hear that. And I feel, feels powerful, that what you're saying there. Yeah. So with that in mind, and coming then back to Iceland, mentioning Iceland. So Svava, in terms of your motivation, and both either from yourself or from other people that you've supported.
I think Sorrel gave an example of that. I mean, for me, it was a wake-up call once I started my healing journey and I had my 3 children, and I realized they were looking at me. They were looking at me how to be a happy, fulfilled, healthy, loving, caring human. And I was like, oh, shoot, right? Because I kept focusing. I thought other people were going to make me happy and I was more focused outwards. But then that really hit home. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, because I also knew that I was stopping the cycle of generational trauma. And I was like, I'm going to do whatever I can to stop the cycle, and really focused on learning how to love Svava, because I wanted to model that for my kids. And lo and behold, I also, right, became the parent and the protector that I needed as a child. And I also became a way better parent and a partner. And I mean, what I started with once I started my advocacy journey was be the change that you want to see in the world. And that also transferred into my healing and what I do to this day. I do my best, of course, humbly human, fall off the horse quite regularly, but try to walk my talk. And and what really motivates me too, like Nathan's talked about, is joy. I talk a lot about, maybe you see the smiling faces here, that some of them that I'm familiar with, that I talk a lot about what sparks joy. Because in doing that, we are, bringing a lot of grace, not just towards ourselves, but others, and also focusing on gratitude. So gratitude that your body was always, always, always fighting for you. Your body was always doing the best it can and continues to do so until we can understand, by befriending it, why it's doing what it's doing. Because our bodies are our temple, really. There's so much wisdom that we have inside, and the deeper we go inside, the deeper we connect outside and to our fellow human beings. So I pretty much preach that every session with my clients. It's like, what brings you joy? What can you do around self-care? And I bring to light some of the things that people are already doing, but when you're putting breakfast on your table or making your meal, remind yourself, I'm doing this because I care about myself. I'm brushing my teeth because I care about myself. And this is how I needed to prove to my inner child that, she thought all humans, all adults were terrible beings. And so to her, constantly, all the little things that I was doing to take care of me, I told her, I'm doing this for you because I care about you. I'm doing this for you because I care about you. And that's how I won her over.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's such a good point. And it reminds me of, so I'll come to David in a minute, because that kind of the body matters so much in that, and having those role models. And I'm reminded of this, a mom that I was working with quite some time ago. And it transpired through conversation that she would come in from work and she would start cooking, still wearing her coat and her shoes and practically the gloves. And, she was already cooking before she had got her outer clothes off, and she hadn't even gone for a pee. So she was stepping side by side, like this, getting the food going, rather than taking the less than 5 minutes that it would take to get into the house properly, close the front door, take the coat off, have a pee, and then go into the kitchen. And when she saw it, and she realized she'd been using it as almost like an emblem of pride. This is how good a mom I am. And then she's like, hang on. No, not helpful. And I think that kind of coming back to sometimes, not even going for a pee. And I don't know how often I've asked people to time how long it takes to go from wherever you are to the loo, have a pee and come back. It takes a lot less time than you think it does. But I've people with kidney infections, people with all sorts of urinary problems of all genders that I've supported, and we check in with this basic thing, and people are so often surprised how quick it happens, over and done with. And actually my bladder, my body is like, oh, thank you. So coming to the body, David, continuing with the theme from Svava, maybe your motivation or motivations that you see with the people you support as to why self-care matters.
you know how you have these habits that don't really serve you, like doing well, yeah, like coming into work, coming home from work and doing the cooking before you've even taken your shoes and your jacket off. I noticed that it's much easier to slip into those habits when uh, I don't care for myself. So I know I haven't had enough sleep, or I haven't eaten properly, or I've not exercised properly, or whatever those self-care things might be. And so my motivation is for self-care, and this is what I do try and instill in other people as well, is this idea that, well, if I'm feeling as close to 100% as I can, if I'm feeling as resilient and resourced as I can, then I have the energy, I have um, the the yeah, I have the energy, I have the focus, I have the ability to be able to overwrite those habits that aren't necessarily serving me, and to put in the effort that I need to put in to be able to do the habits that really do serve and support me. And so the reason why that feels really important is because personally I do have a very big mission, a bit like what Sorrel's speaking to, like, and it's come quite late in life for me. But this sense of there are so many challenges that we have to face as a humanity, and what that's going to require is for us to really look deeply into ourselves at why we keep doing these things to the environment, and to in education and in medicine and in sport and in all these different areas in life, of human life, why we keep doing those things, and to care for ourselves enough to be able to do them differently, because in being able to do them differently, we're going to create a different future for ourselves. So yes, it's the self-motivation, but also when I work with my clients, it's like, yeah, there is this big picture here, and you want to create a very different future for yourself than the one you're heading towards. So let's give you the best chance we possibly can to help you do that.
Yeah. So really hearing what you're saying there in terms of sustainability. So sustainability, we often think about it more in terms of like sustainable forestry or something, but actually sustainable living for the human. It's like, if we're not able to live sustainably for ourselves, how can we ripple that out into the environment, into the systems? And I remember listening to a talk recently where, systemic change is personal change, and personal change is systemic change. Again, coming back to my pebble and the drop, that it really is an interactive relationships. And I think that's and then coming back to the sovereignty that you talk about in your Institute of Sovereign Leadership, that kind of, and sovereign, I love that word, partly because it's gender neutral, but because it hasn't got like ruler. It's being a sovereign in your own life that I really like. And it's from for those of you who don't know, it's one of Carl Jung's archetypes, if you're into that kind of geeky stuff. So we're coming to the end of our panel discussion. We've got just about 10 minutes remaining. So if anybody would like to ask a question, Nikki will keep an eye out for questions in the chat box. But I want to kind of bring this together and then talk about how you can stay in touch with each of us. If there's one particular speaker that's resonated with you, and maybe what we've got coming up, so you can stay in touch with the sort of messaging and the communication that is nourishing and resonating with you here in this moment. So the whole purpose of coming together today, and thank you so much for showing up, each and every one of you, because I genuinely believe that this is kind of like a ripple thing. When you show up for you, you're showing up for me. Because it might be the butterfly effect, but I will somehow benefit from you taking good care of you. I genuinely believe that. So you being here feels deeply nourishing to me. It also is nourishing to me. This is part of my self-care. This is like, I think Svava was talking about, kind of holding myself accountable. When I have these conversations, I'm like, am I actually walking the talk here? How am I doing with my self-care? And one of the things I often talk about is, and Nikki and I talk about it in the First Aid for Feelings manual, is having a dashboard like in your car. So you've got indicators. And I know, for example, one of the indicators in my dashboard is my laundry basket. So I know that when my laundry basket starts overflowing, that my self-care is gone into the yellow amber zone. I think Svava was talking about green, amber, red. You know, I'm in the amber zone when my laundry basket starts overflowing. And also I recognized at some point quite some time ago that I kept rushing, hanging out the laundry. So just like with it going to the loo or toilet kind of thing, I timed it. How long does it take to comfortably hang out a basket of laundry? And for me, it's about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how many socks there are, you know. So instead of trying to fit in the hanging out the laundry before I go and do something else, I actually now allocate 15 minutes. So I can, it's like a mindfulness activity, but that kind of having something on your indicator, so your dashboard, something that you do and you pay attention to that lets you know whether you're struggling or not, can be enormously helpful. So if that's what you take away from today, that would be great. Also, what I'm hearing, like, you know, David's message that boundaries undefended will fall. I think that's, you know, or something like that was
Nathan, that was Nathan's one.
sorry, Nathan said that. Yeah, Nathan was saying that kind of recognizing we need to assert our boundaries, and both Svava and Sorrel have spoken to that as well. You know, David talking about being in the body and kind of leaning forward, being a signal that, or, you know, going back. You know, some of those ideas. And then Sorrel talking about kind of actually gym didn't really work for you, but when you found Morris dancing, it's like, yeah. And then it was off its time. You needed that intervention as part of your kind of self-care kit until you didn't need it anymore. Something, you know, context that changed. So really getting, I hope you've got a flavor from each and one of us, sort of something about permissions, something about ideas and inspiration, and then something about the motivations, both that what we shared about our own motivations, but also what we shared about some of the people we support as well. So now coming into sort of the last bit in terms of how to stay in touch. So if you'd like to stay in touch with what I'm doing with the Helpful Clinic, and I've got Zoe here helping us with the tech, who's on the team. If you could wave for us, Zoe. There she is. And then Nikki, the co-author of the First Little Feelings Manual. If you could wave as well, Nikki. Yeah, thank you. So if you'd like to stay in touch with what we are doing, there is the First Aid for Feelings Manual that you can buy on Amazon. I think they're running some sort of promotion at the moment. Or if you sign up to the newsletter on the First Aid for Feelings website, we will share all the events, like, for example, today's event, but also we'll be running another book club. We've just done a book club for the manual recently. There'll be another one in October. And then there's National Self-Care Week here in the UK, but we're going to celebrate it internationally in November, starting on the 18th of November. So all of those events will be shared in our newsletter. And I know that, Nikki, you've just raised your hand. So what would you like to add in from us?
Just unmuting myself. I just want to make people aware who aren't aware that at the bottom of your screen, you can actually join the chat. And in the chat, we're now sharing where you can find links to all of these specialists' work. So if you don't know how to use the chat bar, look to the bottom of your screen, where you will find an icon which says, she says her screen has gone small.
It says chat.
Yeah, it says chat. So if you press that, you will see a chat where you can enter questions. We've run out of time a little bit for questions now, but enter them anyway, because we'll round them up and we'll get back to you via various means. But you can also see in that chat how you can contact these wonderful specialists who have come together this evening and shared their expertise with us.
Thank you so much for that, Nikki, and for drawing attention to how do you see what we're sharing. There will also be an email after the event as well with the links. So if I come to you, Nathan, if you could tell us a little bit about how to stay in touch with you or what you're doing.
Yeah, so well,
Minute or
I'm
two.
actually going to go on holiday in about 10 minutes. So,
Excellent.
but that's fine. But if you want to stay in contact, LinkedIn's a great space. I write a newsletter probably about once or twice a month, just focusing on this area of mainly my focus is neurodiversity in the workplace, but this whole feelings piece and look at self-care comes in because, you know, as I've said already, it's about people actually. And I think what I'm learning as with any space, there is so much overlap. It's incredible. And if you want to have a conversation about either you want to talk to me about something that's you picked up on here, or just want to have a conversation about what coaching might look like, really happy to do that as well. So yeah, it's been wonderful being here. Thanks, Thor, for the invitation. It's lovely to hang out with everyone else.
Great, Nathan. Thank you. And then David, what's on kind of your radar and for people to stay connected with you?
Thank you, Thor. Yeah, nothing in particular that's on my radar, but as Zoe has put, my LinkedIn profile, people can connect with me on that if they want to continue the conversation with me, or yeah, ask me any questions about coaching or the Institute of Sovereign Leadership, which is relatively new. It's in its kind of infancy, so there's no website or anything like that. But if people want to know more about that, then get in touch with me on LinkedIn and I can share details and tell you what you'd like to know.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. And then Sorrel, if we come to you in terms of kind of staying in touch and what's next, or a potential next focus for you.
So I have a free ebook called 3 Steps to a Magical Relationship, which you can download from my website. And hopefully Zoe's going to pop that in the chat room for me in a minute. There it is. Gosh.
Absolutely. And I definitely recommend that ebook. Definitely.
And I also offer a free call to anybody who wants to talk about working with me. I work one-to-one and with couples, and as a sweetener for husbands, I'm going to offer three introductory sessions for £100, which is an absolute steal.
Okay.
Don't know if I'll get any husbands to the table, but it's worth a try.
Okay, right. Struggling a little bit with that gender perspective, but I'm sure you've got your reasons for that. For those of you who don't know, I'm non-binary in my gender, so I get confused about gender roles. But yeah, but I do appreciate the majority of people are binary, and therefore this will make more sense to them. Thank you, Sorrel. And then coming over to Svava, things coming up for you that you want to share, or how people can stay in touch with you.
Thank you. Yes, I have an online TRE pension releasing exercise class in September. We meet for 4 weeks if anyone is curious, but also that link includes link to my website, where I also offer a self-compassion guide that you can download for free. So thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure and delight. Love talking about this topic. So thank you.
Thank you, Svava. And yeah, I love the fact that even though you've gone from the US to Iceland, I can still refer people to you because it's irrelevant, because through technology we can access and we can sort of share each skill sets. And I know for people I support, I've referred across to the different people here that sometimes being able to plug into that niche of expertise can make a big difference. So, and I think trauma release exercises, or TRE, for those of you who don't know, it's part of that somatic experiencing kind of category, or that kind of being with the body. So it's something that is, becoming more and more known and evidence-based as a practice. So is that everything? So we've done Nathan, David, Sorrel, and Svava. That's everybody and myself. So that's everybody. That's great. So we are 3 minutes to go. So we've got a few minutes to go. So I think what I'd like to share, or ask people to share, is just like one-liner. If there was one thing for you to take away today, what would that be? And I'll start with my kind of message. And those of you who work with me or know me will know this, because I say this all the time. But that it's more helpful to be curious than critical. I really find that so helpful, and to really just start instead of saying, oh, this is bad, I'm like, oh, I wonder, is this bad? Just like, I wonder can be a really great way to soften any statement and turn it into a question. So because when I find that I'm able to access my curiosity, very quickly my compassion comes on board as well, and I go, oh, that's interesting. And therefore, it's not like a dead end. So I find that kind of is more helpful to be curious and critical. It's such a good thing to bear in mind. So if I start with you again, then Svava, is there any kind of message you'd like to leave people with before we finish today?
Less is more when it comes to self-care. Less is more. And yeah, just every little, and just like you said, every little bit counts. So you get to decide what self-care is in your daily life, and just declare that, and you build from that. And
I love it. Declare that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's David's sovereign language. Brilliant. On that note, David, your kind of message, your one-liner or so.
My one-liner from one of my teachers is, which I love, which is, when you're at home in the body, you're at home anywhere.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I get tingles in my body. I totally know that to be true in my body, although I've not heard that phrase before. Thank you so much. And then Sorrel, if I come to you, what's kind of your one-line message?
I think it would be do what brings you joy.
Yeah. It's such a, like Svava's been doing with a simple thing, but actually so powerful. And I know that we will resonate with Nathan as well, because you were talking about joy. But what would your message be, Nathan?
I think just maximize joy if you can. And I know that means different things in different spaces, but
Yeah.
give it a go.
Yeah, give it a go. Love it. That comes back to our experiments. So that brings us nicely to the end of today's event. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. Thank you to our panelists, Sorrel, Svava, Nathan, and David. And thank you to Zoe and Nikki for being in my corner and for being willing to help make this happen. And thank you to every single one of you for being here. I know some of you have had to leave already, but I appreciate all of you showing up in whatever way has meaning for you, because you showing up for you means that we're all benefiting. So thank you so much. You'll get an email in the next few days with a bit of a summary, but till next time, as always, it's more helpful to be curious than critical, and go gently with yourself. Thank you. Bye-bye. Marvelous. We're getting some messages here on the recording. So thank you, Zoe. Yeah, if you stop the recording now, please. Thank you for joining us for the International Self-Care Day event and watching this video. If you'd like to find out more, particularly about the panelists, Nathan, David, Svava, or Sorrel, you can find them in the description below here, their full names, and you'll be able to find them, for example, on LinkedIn, or if you Google them and find their website. But you can also email inquiries@isithelpful.com, and we'll put the link at the end of this video, where you can email us and we will forward you all their details if that feels easier for you. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you've taken away some inspiration. For example, boundaries undefended will fall, or from Nathan or Svava's less is more. So you can help actually strengthen your own understanding of the power of self-care and why it's so important, but also that kind of the how can you do it? How can you start? I hope, like many of us, you can put the 24th of July in your diary. So that will now become an annual self-care day for you that is celebrated around the world. So till next time, if you want to stay in touch with events, sign up to the newsletter, and the link will be as well at the end of this video. But as always, it's more helpful to be curious than critical. Until next time, go gently with yourself.